Hi, everybody. I'm just doing a follow-up video. So I'm still going through the process of OMS, but something that I did recently was take the FSOT exam. I was juggling between the idea of being an FSO versus a FSS. FSO meaning Foreign Service Specialist versus a Foreign Service Officer. So I decided to take the FSOT because I never tried it, and this was my first time trying it. I'm glad I took the OMST first and passed that because that kind of gave me a little bit of confidence that I needed to do the FSOT, which a lot of people will tell you is harder. And I can attest to that. The FSOT was a little harder than the OMST. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that without, revealing anything that would compromise the NDA that I had to sign before taking the test. So I just took that test. But first, before I even talk about the test, let me just talk about the process. As of June 2022, to be a Foreign Service officer, you still have to take the test, but the test is not the same as before in that, before it used to be a pass or fail. It's not a pass or fails now. It's more of a weighted average of your whole overall evaluation for the QEP. So if you hear me refer to the QEP, I'm referring to the qualifications evaluation panel. That's something that's going to happen after you take your FSOT exam. And so it's during that phase that they will look at your scores as well as your personal narratives and your application, your resume, and your background that you fill out on the Pearson's View website before you take the FSOT exam. So all of that stuff is going to be weighed. There's no pass or fail. Before, you used to either pass the exam or fail in the exam. If you failed it, you didn't go to the QEP. Well, now it's different. You still go to the QEP regardless of what your score is on that exam. That said, the score is still somewhat important. Why? Because it's still weighed in their overall evaluation of you. So when they determine whether or not you're going to go beyond the QEP, the FSOT exam is taken into consideration along with other things that may be more important. So I think the personal narratives and your resume and your background is going to carry more weight than the FSOT exam. Nevertheless, if you hose or tank the FSOT exam, then, I think that's going to work against you as far as your overall chances of making it beyond the QEP is concerned. So I highly recommend that you do what I did before I took the FSOT. I studied my rear end off, okay? So I had basically, I put in my application in December. So December 2023. So between December 2023 all the way up till this morning, right before I took the test, I've been studying on a daily basis to prepare for this exam. So that said, what used to be a passing score for the FSOT was 154. So if you got an overall 154 on the FSOT exam, you passed. If you got below a 154, this is all the way up until June 2022, then you failed. So what I got a 164 overall. Okay, so that's considered not only, or prior to June 2022, that's not only considered a passing score, it's also considered a competitive one. Though I've heard of people doing way better than that. Like I've read about people scoring a 190 plus on it. And that to me is just, that's what I was aiming for. And I got way below that. So I'm not, this ain't me bragging at all. Because I studied my rear end off just to get, something that may be a little competitive, but I didn't knock it out the water. Okay. So, I'm going to tell you some of the most difficult things about the exam, just, to kind of help you prepare for it. Of course, again, without compromising anything that's written in the NDA. There are 4 sections to the exam, and the exam took I started my exam at 9 in the morning. I was able to take it at home. And I started at 9 in the morning and I finished just before 12. So almost 3 hours to take that exam. Okay. There's no breaks for bathroom, no breaks to go and refill your cup of coffee, nothing like that. You got to just sit there and be in front of your webcam camera. No timeouts, none of that. Okay. Everything is timed. Each section is timed. Okay. So I'm going to go section by section. The first section I took was the job knowledge. And so this is very broad, but it tests your knowledge of U.S. history, world history, geography, government and politics. It tests your knowledge of math. And, you know, the math wasn't in depth and it wasn't a whole lot of math questions, but there was some math questions. And what I'll say about that is, you know, with the math, the different kinds of math that they had were things like converting currencies, you know, scenarios where you have to convert, you know, the US dollar to something, or a scenario where you have X amount of items at the store, and, you know, you purchase those items, and yeah, I don't want to get too specific. So I'm just thinking about the NDA rather. But look, you got several different kinds of math questions, some statistics, some arithmetic, some converting decimals to percentages, but it wasn't a whole lot. It felt like out of the, I'm trying to think, it was about 40 or 50 questions in the job knowledge section. I felt like I only answered about 5 math questions. Okay. And then there was, let me see, there was questions about organizational management and, you know, questions related to, you know, psychology associated with managing an organization. So those are things that, you know, I used flashcards that I bought off of Amazon to help me with. I also used FSO Compass, which is a great resource. FSO Compass. It's a website where you could take a lot of practice tests to help you prepare for the exam. So I was on that website almost on a daily basis. So they help with the job knowledge. After that was situational judgment, where they give you scenarios and you're supposed to pick, for that same scenario, you pick the best option and you also pick the worst option. And, you know, that section is a little tricky, but that's actually the section I got the highest scores in. The situational judgment, you basically, I think that there is a science to answering those questions. And this is after tanking a lot of practice tests associated with situational judgment because I was overthinking it. These are practice exams that I worked on that the State Department issues, and also practice exams that I was able to take on FSO Compass. So, you know, one of the patterns that I noticed with that, the situational judgment, is you have to think in terms, you got to think about the big picture. Okay. Think about, how does this decision or this behavior or this course of action, how does it make the department look? How does it make the Department of State look? How does it make the embassy look? If this particular action is going to make the embassy look bad or the department look bad, that's probably the worst thing you could do. Okay. And so I just kind of remembered that and used that to guide some of my decisions about what I would pick as the worst option. And then the best option for me, that was easy. And sometimes it's just a process of elimination. You know, you identify the wrong answers immediately. Like, nope, that's not a good idea. Nope, that's not a good idea. And then it'll come down to about 2 or 3 answers that, out of 5, it'll come down to 2 or 3 answers that, you know, well, that's a good idea. And then you might look at another answer and say, you know what, that's even better than that last one. And so, and sometimes that's a little tricky. And that's what makes it a little bit challenging to figure out, okay, this is a good idea, but this one right here is actually a little better than that last idea. And neither one of these things are the wrong thing to do in this scenario, but one of these things is a little better than the other. And that's kind of how you have to play that game and figure out what's the best course of action versus the worst course of action, and narrow out, basically rule out everything in between that. Okay, so that's situational judgment. And then the next section was English expression. And let me tell you, that was by far the most challenging section. And it's probably for a reason that you are not anticipating. At least I didn't before I went into this exam. The most challenging thing about English, something that I feel like I always got good grades in English, writing papers and things like that. I feel like I'm a good writer, you know, and good at grammar and all those kinds of things. That comes naturally for me, especially because I do it a lot for my job. But the most challenging thing was the time. Okay, you have a very strict time limit and a lot to cover in a very short amount of time. And if you're not careful with that clock that's constantly working against you, then time will fly by while you're being thorough and answering these very detailed questions it requires you sometimes to reread paragraphs, okay, entire paragraphs, read it a few times, you know, to get the answer, to get the right answer, you know. And so I found myself doing that a whole lot and not realizing how much time flew by. And I almost did that. I almost didn't complete the section within the required time that they give you. You know, I ended up looking at the clock and I'm like, oh man, I got 5 minutes left to answer about 15 questions. And each question is a paragraph of material that you got to read. And then you got to read a ton of, you might as well say a paragraph of the answers. Your answer selection is like, is you put it together, it's a paragraph. You put all those answers that you got in your multiple choice answers, you put every last one of those answers together, you got another paragraph you got to read in that short amount of time to figure out the answer. And sometimes it requires you going back and forth between what you're reading in the answer and what you're reading in the paragraph to make it make sense. You know what I'm saying? So that time is working against you while you're doing that. And that is a challenge. Okay. And I'm in the habit, because I do this for a living, I'm in the habit of being very thorough, very attention to detail and not missing key details. And so I was taking my time at first, and that actually worked against me. So what I ended up having to do, I got down to I remember it was about a minute left. Once it got to a minute, I made up my mind, I'm just going to have to guess the rest of the answers, because guessing an answer is better than leaving these answers blank. So I probably had 7 questions left with 1 minute left. And these questions and answers were paragraphs. And I just didn't have time to finish that in less than a minute. And so I ended up guessing the last 7 questions, or somewhere around that number. I ended up guessing a whole lot of that so that I didn't get timed out with blank answers, because guessing an answer is better than no answer at all and automatically getting it wrong. So that's what ended up happening on that section. I'm sure I got a lot right, and I did. My score was decent and competitive in English expression. So the ones I took my time, I got it right. But then there was some that I had to guess, and I'm assuming that's what ended up, hurting me as far as my score was concerned. Even though I didn't do bad in that section, I feel like I could have did better if I had more time, or if I managed my time better. That's actually the better way to put it. So be careful with that. That was like with the other sections, the job knowledge and the situational judgment. I was able to finish those sections, and I had plenty of time. I had almost 10 minutes left to review stuff in the job knowledge section. Okay, almost 10 minutes to go back and review every question that I did in that section. And likewise in the situational judgment, I had like 5 minutes left after I finished that to just go back and review stuff that I flagged, because you can flag questions and it'll give you a list of stuff that you flagged that you thought you don't know if you have the right answer to it. So you want to review it after you finish everything else. So I had time to do all of that for situational judgment and job knowledge. I didn't have any of that kind of time for English expression. And I think that's the point of it. Okay. To be able to think on your feet and to respond quickly and just, make a decision with the knowledge that you have available in a tight deadline that you have. So I think that's actually the point of it. So that was by far the most exhausting and stressful section out of everything. It wasn't because the work itself was hard. It's the time constraints that makes that very challenging. Okay. So you are going to be tested on your grammar, the use of semicolons, commas, the spelling of words or the misspelling thereof, the proper use of certain words, proper placement of certain things like verbs and nouns, accumulatives, and coordinating conjunctions. They're going to test all of that, okay? And there's different sections of the English test, the overall English test. I think it gave me like 65 questions and 35 minutes to answer it. It was crazy. It was crazy. So I hats off to the other people that found it easy. That wasn't me at all. I mean, the work is not hard. It's just the time constraints. So I guess I'm not a speed reader. Lastly, there was the written section. So that's also timed. And I think that a lot of people, I could see the potential for people to struggle on that one. So they gave 3 options. I'm not going to say what they were, but I can generalize that a lot of this stuff had to do with, I think I'll give you this advice. Current events is something that you want to be well versed in, as well as historical. And I think that that'll give you more substance to write about when they give you a subject and they present something that they want you to analyze. And so, I relied on my knowledge of both recent events in the news. And by recent, I mean stuff that happened within the past year and as recently as a week ago. I used that to help formulate analysis of the things that they asked about in that section. And I also used, my knowledge of history, my knowledge of the Bill of Rights, and my knowledge of why some of the things were written in there to answer some of the questions that they had and how that applies to the questions that they had. I think that helps. I think so. It remains to be seen if I actually passed or did well on the written portion of the exam, because that's not actually graded. The results that I got was strictly about multiple choice, not about the writing. And about the writing, I hear a lot of people don't make it past QEP because they didn't do well on the written part of the FSOT exam. Okay, so I want you to take a note of that I can't tell you how good I did on that. I can tell you that it felt good, but I can't tell you how well I did because I don't know until after I get to the QEP, and they'll let me know whether, I've made it or not. That said, you have a very tight schedule timeline on finishing that. 25 minutes to write something substantive, something that has proper grammar, something that's well organized, and state your position. They won't judge you based on your opinion of it. You can argue for or against something, but you need to have a position, and it needs to be clear. It needs to be well organized, well written. They're going to judge your grammar, your punctuation, and your use of the English language. But I think more importantly, they're going to judge your ability to analyze and provide an in-depth, substantive argument with fact-based evidence and approaches to whatever your position is. And it doesn't matter what your position is, just as long as you can defend that position with some, in-depth analysis. So, like I said, knowledge of recent events, watching the news daily, reading things like The Economist, and also just being familiar with U.S. history. I did an audio book. I do a lot of driving back and forth to where I go because it's quite a distance, my work, from where I live. So on a daily basis, when I'm driving rather, I was listening to AP U.S. History. It's an Audible available. I was listening to that on a daily basis. That was a very good book because he talks a whole lot about U.S. history, going back from the colonial age to, more recent times. And I'll tell you what, some of those questions certainly came up on this exam. Some of the things that were addressed in that book emphatically came up on this exam. And the only reason I knew it was because I was listening to that book on a daily basis. So I would highly recommend that because U.S. history, they're going to ask you quite a few questions on that, as well as world history. Another thing I did as far as world history is concerned, maps. You know what I got up there on my wall? I got I got a map of the world, and I study that, okay? I try to visually remember what, certain borders of certain countries, and it'll make it make sense, because some questions they'll ask you about, I'm not going to say the question exactly, but they'll ask you about border disputes, between two countries. And if you're familiar with the map, you can answer that question. You know who's on the border of this country. You know what I'm saying? So they'll ask some questions that just a simple knowledge of geography can help you answer this question, even if you don't know the history of what they're talking about. You could do some process of elimination. You know that this country ain't nowhere near the border of this country, so that's not the answer. Neither is this one the answer. That's not even in the same continent as this one. You know what I mean? So you can eliminate some answers, and then you can make a logical choice. Oh, these two, they border each other. And these two, no, this borders this country, but not this. Okay, I know the answer to this one. It's this. You know what I mean? So get a map, a world map. And then I also suggest getting the atlas. This book right here. All right. Atlas of the World. All right. I read that book front to back just to get a general understanding of, the world. It breaks it down by continent, and it gives you some important information. It's not like reading, even though the book is thick, it's not a whole lot of paragraphs. It's a whole lot of maps and fast facts about the nations, things that you could easily remember, that'll help you and may come up on the exam. Okay. So, geography can help you answer, be knowledgeable about geography can help you answer a lot of questions about world history and, questions about wars and border disputes. And, you can make sense of it if you understand the map of certain territories. So I highly encourage that. Trying to think some other tips. I told you about FSO Compass. And then, I think that's all I got. So, hey, look, it was exhausting, but I think the studying that I put into it, at least it gave me enough to get what I think and what, when I Googled it, I asked Google and I asked an AI chat box, what is considered a competitive score? And both gave me the same answer, 154 or higher is considered a competitive score. So I got a 164. So even though I thought I'd be able to score higher than that, and I've seen people do way better, that's in that competitive range, and that's fine. So look, I say take it, man. Go for it. And at least, even if you don't pass it, you go in there with you go in there next year with some experience. And, you know, even though this is my first time taking the FSOT, I took the OMST last year in May. And that gave me the confidence that, oh, man, I could take that FSOT exam. You know what I mean? So just being familiar with the kinds of questions that they ask, even though the FSOT is definitely harder than the OMST, it's like going to the minor leagues before you go to the majors. That's what it kind of felt like. The FSOT exam is definitely harder than the OMST. Nevertheless, the one can absolutely prepare you and give you confidence to pass the other. So take both. That's what I did. Take both and see what happens. So my application for the OMST is still full speed ahead. I'm going through the security clearance process. That's still a process that's going to take months. God knows how long. It could take longer than that. But in addition to that, the FSOT process can move in parallel. And, you know, if that process goes through and they make an offer for me to join the Foreign Service as an officer rather than a specialist, I'll definitely take that. And guess what? The security clearance and the suitability review will apply to the FSO or the OMST. You don't have to go through that process or the medical process because you went another route. You know, all of that, since it's very recent, is actually happening concurrently, is going to qualify for both instances. So I suggest taking it and, you know, just seeing what happens. So we'll see what happens down the road. I'll let you know, good or bad, for better or worse, what happens with the QEP and beyond if I make it beyond the QEP. Hey, good luck to you. God bless.